Los Angeles is always preparing for the big one, the next big earthquake. But are we ready for the next big flood? Scientists say climate change could cause a storm of biblical proportions, a megastorm. Louis Sahagun is a staff writer for the LA Times, and he's written about this rare phenomenon. Louis, thanks for coming in and kind of scaring the pants off of me with your article. The next big one, you think? A flood could be that impactful?
It actually could. And what scientists are saying is that there are new cycles of weather upon us that are triggered by climate change. And they're characterized by extreme shifts in weather, actually shifts of extreme weather, the likes of which we haven't seen back to back. They believe this is the beginning of a new regime of weather in places like Southern California, and even the world. The problem is that much of our flood control infrastructure, the big stuff, was built at a time when engineers didn't figure in these kinds of shifts. They were based on 20th century assumptions and data only going back 100 years.
One of the first big floods that we have in recorded history in our area was in 1861. It rained for 45 days, 36 inches of rain. Tell us about it.
That particular flood was caused by several days of intense rain that actually flooded Central California to the extent that you couldn't cross it without a boat. Wow, and it created catastrophic flooding, took lives, destroyed farms, and it was thought to have been the scale of a storm that only would occur every 1,000 years to 10,000 years. But new research suggests there's a 50-50 chance of a storm that size, that magnitude, hitting us within 40 years.
And we've seen dams fail before. The St. Francis Dam north of Santa Clarita collapsed in 1938. Orange and Riverside counties were hit particularly hard. Something like 430 people died. Just huge catastrophic loss of life.
One of the most dangerous rivers in the United States is the Santa Ana River because of its propensity for flooding. LA flooded again in 1938. It was so destructive.
115 people died.
115 people died, and LA teamed with the Army Corps of Engineers to tame the LA River so that it would never happen again by concretizing all 51 miles.
Well, just because we have things that are built by the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't mean they work. 180,000 people had to be evacuated in 2017 because the Oroville Dam started to crumble after a heavy rain.
This is another example of a new understanding, which is that these giant water infrastructures were built, did not take into account the kinds of weather and water-related issues that we're seeing today.
In your piece, you describe the San Gabriel River, which starts about 10,000 feet up in the mountains and goes all the way down to Long Beach, and it pushes through a natural narrow opening in the hillsides near the San Gabriel, southern end of the San Gabriel Valley, called the Whittier Narrows. And that is now a dam that is in crisis. You have a personal experience with this dam.
I do. My memory clicks in 1952 when the Army Corps of Engineers came in to that area and told the largely Mexican-American families, farm workers that were encamped in there, including my own family, to leave because they were going to build a spillway and a massive earthen dam to protect the region from flooding. It's fascinating that now, all these years later, that very dam now poses an extraordinary risk to over 1 million people downstream. The risk is that it could collapse in the event of one of these major storms.
Let's talk about the communities that would get hurt, right? 1 million people. 1 million people could be impacted. You wrote that Pico Rivera could be covered by 20 feet of water. Downey could see 15 feet. Santa Fe Springs, 10 feet?
The Army Corps of Engineers computer modeling by the Army Corps indicates that 25 cities are at risk downstream from the dam between Pico Rivera, which is immediately on the other side of the dam, all the way to Long Beach. 25 cities that are home to over 1 million, mostly working class people. The problem is that a major surge of floodwaters would overrun the dam and melt it like a sugar cube in the rain, and or erode it from underneath. And that's not all. The spillway is constructed such that it will open automatically under certain conditions. So they can't turn it, if something like that were to happen, it would open on its own, and then you would see Pico Rivera under possibly 20 feet of water.
And I want to, talk about that 900-year flood phrase again. It's not that it could be a flood like this every 900 years. What's it really mean?
What it really means is that a flood of these colossal scales would occur once every, that the chances are 1 in 900 that it would occur in a given year. But it doesn't mean that it won't happen for 900 years or 900
It's a false
years
sense
from
of
now.
complacency, right?
Yes, and as a result, for example, Pico Rivera is only beginning to revise its evacuation plans because its current evacuation plans would direct traffic over the San Gabriel River, which would be an enormous flood zone in the event of a dam collapse.
You mentioned that we're going to have to look at climate science, and they're going to have to adjust because of climate change, the way that they forecast these great events, which will give you a little bit of protection. But what really needs to happen is that dam needs to be rebuilt or reinforced, and the Army Corps of Engineers says it's going to cost $600 million. They need that money from the federal government. What happens next?
What happens next is that they need to persuade Congress and the Army Corps itself at its highest levels to make a budgetary priority of that $600 million. And by the way, the reconstruction of this dam, this particular dam, could be completed by 2026. And local elected officials and municipal officials are writing letters like crazy right now, trying to persuade the Corps and Congress to do exactly that. In the meantime, the evacuation routes have to be revised, and quickly, honestly, because we don't know whether or not one of these events could happen next year.